Well, welcome everyone to our panel. We're going to go through some quick introductions. I'm just going to set up some context for what we're going to talk about today. So today we have leaders from three top pharmaceutical companies, and then we have a representative from AWS that's going to give us kind of a cross-industry perspective. So you're going to hear about individual companies' journeys that they're on in the Gen AI and AI space, as well as across pharmaceutical industry view as well. So very quickly, I'm Matt Rich. I work for PwC, and I lead our pharma and life sciences practice in the technology space. And we have three of our distinguished industry leaders here, along with our AWS friend Deepak, that are going to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Murali Virudachalam. I lead cloud data analytics and enterprise architecture at Gilead. Gilead is a research-based pharma located in Foster City, California. We are about 18,000 employees, 70 billion market cap. We are focused on virology, oncology, and inflammation.
And Murali, I'd like you and the rest of the panelists to comment on your perspective, Gen AI, overhyped, underhyped, or real?
I think it is real and overhyped, and hype is good.
Awesome. Yeah. Tim?
All right, good afternoon. I'm Tim Coleman, Chief Technology Officer for Eli Lilly and Company. We're a medicines company based in Indianapolis, Indiana, and our focus is uniting caring with discovery to create medicines that make life better for patients around the world, with a particular focus in diabetes, weight management, oncology, immunology, and also neuroscience. In terms of your question, it's hard to talk about AI without using the word hype. But for me, AI is very real. And it's real because some of the outcomes that we're seeing in the early implementations of AI are very, very compelling. And I'm super excited because I would say we haven't even scratched the surface of what's possible with AI in healthcare and in the life sciences space. So again, I'm very bullish. I think the best is yet to come.
And my name is Ken Shea. I'm Vice President responsible for cloud hosting and productivity services at Bristol Myers Squibb. We are an oncology and immunology company, and our focus is getting patients and therapies, getting drugs to our patients faster, right, and therapies. Regarding the comment that my colleagues made, I think I'm in the same space. It's real and it's hyped. We've seen some amazing opportunities. I think one of the more compelling things it's done is give a real-life example of what a cloud-native solution can be to the business population. We've talked about it a lot. We've mostly used cloud and infrastructure as a service or hosting, but this has given an actual solution people can tangibly start to look at. And what it's done is opened up possibilities for other solutions using AI, even though AI has become synonymous with LLM, which isn't really fair. But it gives us the opportunity to leverage the new technology and the new awareness of what's going on, and then find other solutions to solve problems more effectively.
Thank you. Deepak?
Hi, I'm Deepak Nair. I come from the life sciences business for AWS. I've been with the company 8 years. And I'll go to Andy Jassy. Andy said a couple of months ago on CNBC that there's a hype cycle that will be followed by a substance cycle. What I'm seeing more and more is that the hype cycle is going to be followed by a budget cycle, and that's going to make it real for everyone.
Very good point. So let's start with vision. So I'd love to hear from each of you kind of on what's your North Star for Gen AI? Like, what are you guys trying to achieve? What are you going after? I mean, we understand the industry and the problems the industry is trying to solve, but I would love to hear individual examples, and then Deepak, if you could bring it home across the different companies you support. Murali?
You to start? Okay. So before I start about the North Star for AI for Gilead, I want to give a little bit of context, because all of my answers will be based on the context that I'm going to give now. So about 3 years ago, we decided that AWS is our strategic cloud service provider. And we have only one enterprise data platform on AWS. We have a single enterprise business catalog. And we have an AI platform that consists of Databricks, as well as AWS SageMaker ecosystem, Bedrock. And with that context, we also adopted data mesh approach to manage data at scale. and we won industry awards to manage data at scale in terms of data mesh approach. So the North Star for AI at Gilead is basically the patient and the patient outcomes. So the vision for our company is to develop and deliver innovative medicines to people living with life-threatening diseases. So with that in mind, our aspirations are to bring 10+ transformative therapies to patients by 2030. So anything and everything we do with AI is to enable the entire pharma value chain, from drug discovery, development, commercialization, including back office processes. And we have seen we have implemented a lot of use cases. We are working on a knowledge management use case in our research drug discovery space, where literally research data scientists go through thousands of documents for target assessment, right? Just one simple use case. So our approach is to adopt AI across the entire pharma value chain.
Thank you, Murali. And I think that's a great point about, the patient is the reason.
Yeah.
As you think about it, the things that we're going after, the diseases we're trying to solve now are the hardest. The oncology, the things with the brain, the Alzheimer's, like those are going to require a more sophisticated approach. Tim, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Our goal at Lilly with AI is to reimagine how Team Lilly will operate in an AI-powered world. And so ultimately that means we want to bring together the best of breakthrough technology with the best of our scientific expertise and our business expertise to help speed innovative medicines to our patients. At the end of the day, it's all about our patients. And just like Murali, we see this opportunity across the entire value chain. So we're focused on how do we accelerate drug discovery, how do we speed our clinical trials, particularly patient enrollment, which is kind of the long pole in the tent, how we can improve patient experiences and the experiences of our healthcare professionals in working with us, and then ultimately how we optimize business processes for speed and also for efficiency.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. Ken.
And from the Bristol Myers Squibb BMS perspective, kind of do the same thing Murali did, is set the context, right? So Bristol Myers is facing a difficult few years coming forward. We have two of the largest loss of exclusivity drugs. It's it's the cliff we're about to go off of. On the positive side, we just released 9 new drugs. We've got another 12. We've got an exceptionally strong pipeline. So it's how do we navigate that cliff that we're going to go through while we go into the valley to come out of it stronger? And we see AI as being an enabler across that to unleash the information and do the same things that I think all pharma is trying to do. Yes, we want to drive more innovation. We want to get more drugs in our pipeline because we can't just focus on the ones we have. We have to make sure that that pipeline stays strong. And our CEO is committed to that by focusing on research and focusing on commercial. Our releases have to go well, our new drugs have to hit the market effectively, and we have to make sure we fill that pipeline. And we see AI helping us in all of those. And large language models and AI in research will allow us to identify therapies that we might not have seen before, and if we do see them faster. On the commercial side, we want to understand more about how our patients are dealing with and reacting to our drugs and make them more effective as we go to market. In manufacturing, can we be more efficient in the way we make our drugs and reduce the number of missed batches, especially in a therapy like CAR-T, which is individualized medicine. And then finally, if I look at it from the clinical side, same type of thing, how do we increase the populations that have been underserved in our clinical trials to make our drugs more effective and understand their impact broadly and get clinical trials out to market faster.
Thank you, Ken. And Deepak, maybe you could comment on what you're seeing across all of your clients.
I think every fathomable use case has been discussed in the last 3 minutes. So I think there's a North Star beyond that. I think, so beyond all the use cases and productivity, I think at the end of the day, every pharma company and every patient wants newer therapies to market. It takes 10 years, $2 billion, and hopefully Gen AI makes a dent in all of that, from discovery all the way to commercialization. But I do think that for me, irrespective of where Gen AI ends up, I think it's the best reason, the best excuse that you had in a couple of decades to go get the money you need to sort out the underlying data. So, to me, the true North Star is that we get data into a place where even basic analytics can get done better. I think there's a lot of data silos and a lot of data fluidity challenges. So a true North Star would be to get data flowing within these large pharmas to the effect that they can actually discover drugs faster.
Right. That's the lifeblood of the AI model is the data, right? So that's the first challenge to solve. We've heard some good examples of how the different companies are trying to solve that with mesh approaches and so forth. So Deepak, let's stay with you. So where would you see from all of your customer and client interactions the one place with the greatest impact right now?
I think everybody kind of started off, and I'm going to say, in sort of enterprise-wide use cases, productivity use cases. And I think that will continue on for a few months. But I think the real game changer is going to be once we get either new models to come out or existing models to be tweaked to address the area of biology and chemistry. So that is where I believe, once we can get there to a level of precision. I think these general purpose models get you so far, but once you get to that level of specificity where you have a specific model that addresses a very niche use case, could be in molecular imaging or could be in helping with better trial participants. So if you get to that level of use case, I think that will be a game changer. And the question is how quickly can you get there and what investments are needed, both from the industry and from folks like AWS to get to that point.
So starting out kind of enterprise productivity and then down into more scientific and medical functions.
That's right.
Later.
I think we can get there faster. I think there's enough interest within the both the model providers and the industry in general to get to that point quickly.
All right, Murali, would love to hear from you. The one area that you're seeing the greatest impact now, not in the future, right now, where are you seeing the biggest impact?
Well, I have to say that we are still experimenting with generative AI. All business functions in Gilead are working on generative AI use cases. But I do see where there's a lot of unstructured data where it has to be processed or synthesized, right? So what I said earlier during my introduction is the drug discovery space, knowledge management use cases, right? So researchers actually go through thousands of documents to uncover hidden relationships between disease, target, and molecules. So generative AI can help there. And again, to what Deepak said, the outcome is ultimately employee productivity, right? And of course, operational efficiencies and scaling innovation. But generative AI is applicable across the pharma value chain. But one thing where we are focused on is developing the knowledge management use case in research. Yeah.
So knowledge management.
Yeah.
That's a great use case. And I know others on the panel have the same use case in their companies. Let's kind of switch gears though from like what's real and what's having impact now to how do you measure that, right? Because it's one thing to say it's impactful, it's another to actually realize the value. So Tim, I'd love to hear quantitative or qualitative how you guys have been doing that.
Sure. I mean, we use the same, traditional efficiency metrics as probably most organizations do. But we pioneered, I think, a concept in pharma a couple years ago that we call DWEs. DWE stands for Digital Worker Equivalent, and one DWE equals 2,000 hours of human effort, so basically a full year's worth of effort. It's actually helped us better quantify for our senior leaders what hours saved actually looks like. And people are, very much embrace FTEs and also now DWEs. Where are we going with this? We're beginning to think about our total workforce as the combination of human workers and digital workers, with an emphasis on increasing digital workers over time. This is a strategy of augmentation. So not doing more with less, but actually doing more with what we currently have. And the concept is gaining a lot of positive traction with our senior leaders, and I think it's here to stay.
And maybe just one additional comment on how you're measuring success when it comes to the patient. Because what you talked about was internal, and it's fantastic, but anything that you are looking at the patient side.
Yeah, I think for one, it would be speed in terms of getting our medicines to patients. And then secondly, it's about having a positive experience. Positive experience on our medications and achieving the right outcomes, but also a positive experience in terms of their relationship and their engagement with the company when they need.
Awesome. Ken, would love to hear from you on how you're measuring the value.
And Tim, by the way, I'm very impressed with the digital worker concept. That's an interesting way of framing it. What we've done is a little bit more rudimentary in that there are lots of trapped dollars all over our organization related to third parties that are helping us to do things. And a lot of it has to do with what I would say where we see most of the opportunity in AI at the moment is summarization and consolidation. Right? We haven't gotten to creation yet, but we're in the summarization where we have opportunities to take manual efforts, things like how do you create a clinical trial protocol, or how do you create a computer system validation document. A lot of times there's a lot of bodies helping us do that, and they're reading and synthesizing and creating. So if we can use, for summarization, AI to help us with that, and then take out that cost that we don't need anymore, we can focus that money in other areas. So that's how we're starting to measure and see the efficiencies. The other thing we're seeing is, can we actually utilize the information that's trapped that somebody would use to spend 24 hours to go find to respond to a question? Can we accelerate that by feeding that into a large language model and getting 60% of it back out so that they've got a starting point and it's a BMS starting point, it's not a generic starting point?
Yeah, I really like the point about, pharma being a super document heavy because of the regulation industry. A lot of documentation to produce. The power of Gen AI really can help there. That's a great point. Maybe let's then switch to learnings. So, Deepak, maybe would love to hear from you the most common 1 or 2 learnings that you hear from your customer as they go down the Gen AI journey.
I think I'll sort of go back 3 months, or maybe even 6 months. There were no shortage of ideas, even today. Every customer we speak to, there's 100, 200 ideas they all believe are perfect Gen AI ideas. And then we start double clicking on those, and it starts narrowing down. So by the time you get from ideas to use cases, there's fewer, and then even fewer when you get to POCs. And as you think about the ROI point, and you're trying to say, okay, should I move this POC into production? Now we're looking at a few, like 2 or 3 that are worthwhile because of the ROI question. So I think the biggest learning has been that there isn't an idea that's not a good Gen AI idea, but do you really have the ROI and the data to get to a point of efficacy and accuracy and all that? So that's been the big learning. Don't make every idea, and don't pursue every one of them. I think customers are getting to that point where there's a more better filtration there. The other thing has been one model. Of course, there's a very popular model out there that everybody has pursued. I think now we're getting to a point, cost and access and otherwise, where customers are really thinking, okay, we've tried that one model. Should we be looking at a variety of models for the use case that we have? I think that's been a maturity thing. But I think we're getting to that point where both because of the availability of models and customers' understanding of what those models could do, there's a lot more specificity coming out of it.
Like that. Data ROI and models. Murali?
Well, first learning is we have is data foundation, right? We have a great approach to managing structured data, and I talked about data mesh as part of my introduction. So we do a great job in managing structured data at scale, but we haven't done a good job in managing unstructured data. So this knowledge management that we're working on for the research division will help us. So that's first learning, that to have a great data foundation, make sure data is discoverable and usable as well. The second learning is, while everybody's focused on the shiny implementation of the generative AI use cases, it's very important to figure out the ops, LLM ops, FM ops, because we have to know how to incorporate new ontologies and taxonomies, how to add the 1,001st document. Do we need a technical person to do it or a non-technical person do it? FinOps intersection with LLM ops. So we have to figure that out. And I must say that we also have a conversational AI platform in Gilead. We are using Isera. So conversational AI existed for so many years. That's the chatbots that use natural language processing. That has an overlap with generative AI. And so Isera is working well for us in terms of chatbots. And it provides foundational and operational capabilities to manage chatbots. But now, how can we intersect generative AI with conversational AI and manage the LLM ops is something that we are figuring out. But again, it's a lesson learned. over the past 8 months, every business unit is implementing generative AI use cases, but they're focused on it. But how do we take it to production? How do you manage the entire life cycle with focus on cost as well? So that's another huge lesson learned for us.
So how do you combine it with other techniques? Then how do you
Yes.
scale to production? Scale's a great point.
Yeah.
I know that if we were going to pull the whole industry, scale would be one of the top challenges. Tim, thoughts?
Sure, if I could jump in and maybe come at it from a little bit of a different perspective. I think hallucination is a common objection, at least I hear, as to why not to use generative AI or AI. And clearly it's an important risk that we need to mitigate, especially given the industry that we're in. By the way, people also hallucinate. And just like AI creates errors and makes errors, people make errors. The learning is not hallucination with people or machines. The learning is that the quality practices that we all appreciate, and I want to emphasize appreciate, those same quality practices are going to continue to be important for the foreseeable future in order to achieve the high quality standards that we must meet. And at the end of the day, I believe even though we are still going to have to apply those quality practices, we're still going to see significant benefit in terms of cost, in terms of speed, than we did beforehand. So, quality.
Yeah, I love that point. Still going to need the quality, yeah, and I think that the regulator is going to come along with that story. Ken?
So a few learnings. Take us back to October, or actually right around this time last year, we were at reInvent, and all the great news were coming out. Between this and end of the year, when OpenAI kind of blew everything out of the water and changed our priorities for next year, we were pursuing a single cloud differentiating model, right? So we were heavily AWS, and the other clouds basically had to show that they differentiated enough for us to consider moving workloads. We were heavily compute bound, right? Because all these models, I hate using the term models because now everybody goes LLM, but all of the GCPs were generally focused on slack capacity, right? x86, you could get it, you could get rid of it, you didn't need it. This all blew everything out of the water because now you had a premium resource, right? GPUs that were very, very difficult to get access to. You had to make sure that you use them effectively. You got this brand new model where GCP's, Google's offering something, and Azure's offering something, and Amazon's. So now multi-cloud has actually become something that we've needed to consider, and how do we manage and play with, where up until last year it wasn't a consideration at all. And I think the other is multi-model is going to be something that we're going to have to live with as well, and the ability to move in and out of those as some gets more effective, or we realize some hallucinate less or hallucinate more. What's our standard? How do we measure against it? So it's become a much more dynamic landscape than it was a year ago, and I anticipate for a period of time this will shake out. So it's availability of resources is one of our learnings, and the scarcity of it, and the fact that there's only one player in the space that's providing what everybody needs. And then the other is the complexity of which models are you going to choose, and how do you train them or not.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ken. So in about 15 or so minutes, we're going to switch to audience questions. We're just going to kind of double click one more level down and dive into some examples in a second. But before that, one topic that I'm hearing more and more, I don't want to say complaints, but concerns about, is cost. Ken, you talked about GPU usage. That's going to be increasing more and more. It's not the most cost effective, right? It's more cost effective on the cloud than it is other places. But how are you guys starting to manage? Saying that you're already managing it might be too much, but how are you starting to manage those costs for AI and Gen AI as they come along? Let's start with Murali.
I would say we have to start with a cost-aware architecture. A lot of people are not familiar with serverless compute, as an example, right? So my team provides technology governance for the AI platform for all of Gilead. As part of that technology governance, we have published architectural patterns that promote serverless compute, as an example, to save cost. But also, when you start with the design of any AI system, involving the right people, including FinOps resources as part of the design process is very important. And as part of our strategy with AWS accounts, we have a good tagging strategy so we can charge back to the business units. And of course, education and awareness goes a long way. So we do have cloud fluency programs to educate people on how to reduce costs, runtime costs. And I would say the last point is we have a strong MLOps practice. MLOps is people, process, technology coming together to manage the entire machine learning lifecycle. We are very mature in that. As part of that, we are able to optimize code written by data scientists to run 1/3 of the time on cloud, much to the chagrin of AWS. So a strong focus on MLOps is important. With LLM Ops, we have to figure out how can we run generative AI applications much faster and optimized.
More efficient.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe, Tim, we'll just hear from you on that.
I think to start with, the reason why we're investing in AI, of course, is to drive transformation. And as a part of that transformation, of course, we want to achieve speed and we want to reduce costs. So I think the first principle is that the return on investment is positive. But with that said, we are seeing significant increases in our usage of cloud. And as a result, our costs are going up, particularly in the drug discovery area. I would agree with Murali. We're looking at our solution architecture as one key area. I think the other one that maybe hasn't been mentioned is cloud FinOps. And we're partnering with our cloud providers, including AWS, to figure out how to best maximize our use of cloud, but also reduce and manage down the cost. So those would be the two key areas for us.
All right. So let's get down into some real examples. So we talked kind of about like where we're seeing some impact, what functions, maybe enterprise tech. Now let's get down one more level. Deepak, we'll start with you. So maybe your favorite across all of the different things you're seeing, your favorite example of a use case that is going to be producing value.
I will have to say it's probably around knowledge management or around submissions to the FDA. I think that's where I think there's a lot of work. So both understanding previous submissions and being able to automate a lot of those processes, which I think could be very sort of human intensive today and prone to errors. I think that I find to be one that is that can be controlled. Now, of course, the regulators have to agree to it, but I think that's one area I feel like it's going to get an immediate adoption in terms of, beyond all the summarization stuff that's happening in the regular sort of enterprise-wide use cases. I think that's the one I feel like will give a big lift. So if we can get it done right the first few times and get enough confidence to the regulators, I feel like that's the one that's going to give a big lift.
Yeah, the submissions process is a massive, massive manual lift. So that's a great example. And that's sometimes the longer pole in the tent, depending on what therapeutic area you're looking at. So great example. Ken, I'll ask you, what is one of your favorite use cases and why?
So I think there's two. So the first one is following on to what Deepak said. We put in place a program to look at all of the documents associated with a clinical trial. And one of the first use cases pilots that we're doing is we're feeding in the clinical trial protocol document, which is 65 pages and exceptionally technical. And out of that, you have to generate a patient form that they will sign and say, I'm willing to understand what I'm getting myself into, and I sign on for this clinical trial. Somebody has to read that whole document and create something that people at varying levels of educational experience can sign. So I've got somebody who's got a college degree, I've got somebody who's got a high school degree, I may have somebody who's had varying levels of education, and they need to be able to understand what am I getting myself into. And we found a meaningful transition from being able to consume that document and generate at a varying level of educational background a document that's useful. And that's one of our first use cases that we've been able, and this goes to the concept of models, right? So we couldn't put that into a generic model because it doesn't have the scientific context, but we were able to find a model that did have the scientific context, and that got us farther along. And then the other would be computer system validation, where we're looking at the same type of thing, very manual. You have a validated system and you get system changes because you have to do the upgrade. Well, you have to figure out which ones have to be tested. Same thing, somebody's got to read through it and they got to translate it. We were able to load one of those requirements documents into a LLM, and literally in a half an hour, it gave all of the information that somebody who read the document came out with. Those are the time-saving opportunities and the cost-saving opportunities that make this transformational for us.
That's a great, though, patient example, the first one, like generating a plain language summary that somebody can understand versus the 65 pages of medical and scientific terms. Like that's a value. Tim?
Yeah, we've already talked about drug discovery, so I won't hit that one again. But I think my favorite use case is actually scientific e-authoring. So you're going to hear a bit of a trend here. I think we all would understand that we're a very content-rich and document-rich industry. I know we are at Lilly, and it's very labor-intensive. It's also very time-intensive to put together some of these very complex scientific documents. We've been doing some experimentation, particularly in our clinical and regulatory documents. And the specific use case that we're working on are patient narratives or trial narratives, the summaries of patient experiences in our trials. We've been able to demonstrate with natural language generation that what would, on average, take about 4 hours to create one patient narrative now takes less than a minute, which is super compelling when you just think about the number of patients that are involved in our clinical trials around the world. So we're very bullish on scientific authoring. We think, and it's not so much about reducing costs, it's actually about the time savings. Every day that we save, every week that we save in terms of the submission process, ultimately results in getting our medicines to patients faster. So we think that one's, within our purview, and we're, looking at multiple use cases across the enterprise for authoring.
And I think that's a great example of when you shorten the time, and depending on the company you work for, the pipelines are different, but one of your promising therapeutics is in the Alzheimer's space. Mm-hmm. Slowing down the progression. If you could get that to market 6 months faster, how many people could it help slow down the progression of Alzheimer's for? Like that's a significant value. So that time savings means a lot. Marley?
Well, I know they gave great use cases, but I'll focus on a very simple one, okay? In Gilead, people open tickets to find out what is the jury duty policy.
Jury duty?
Yes. So answers to simple questions are buried in documents somewhere. Yeah. So we are trying to, of course, just like any other enterprise, create Gilead GPT where employees can ask questions. So that really translates to a lot of employee productivity. So
happy people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would actually like to know what that policy is for our company. Thank you for that idea. So let's switch. So we heard a lot of great examples. Let's switch to things that you're concerned about. And I'm not talking just technology items. It could be talent, governance, risk. But maybe give a couple examples of the biggest worries, the biggest risks that you're trying to manage. I'll go to Ken for that.
So I think there's a few. This is a net new technology capability, and I remember we've all lived through GDPR and Schrems 2 and all of the variations on regulations that will come out, and it was recently published. I think the U.S. government has come out with its perspective on AI already, which is slightly high level, but not too concerning yet. The EU has reserved the right to come back with what they think. And the unknown is what we worry about. And I think the other then is controlling this as it starts to roll out and the bias associated with it. We all know that the models are biased based on who created them. And understanding that bias is something you find out over time. It's not like they publish it on the front page. So I think understanding what we're getting ourselves into with these models as we go down and the unintended consequence of their use over time is some of the stuff we thought of, some of the things we consider at BMS, and also creating a responsible AI policy internally on how these are used. We've all seen the poor, who was it, Samsung, I think it was, the engineer that loaded stuff up into ChatGPT and went, oops, So there's an unknown interaction that we believe people will follow, but people still email stuff that they shouldn't. This now makes it out to everybody if it's done the wrong way. So I think those are the things that we're concerned about.
Ken, that's an excellent one. Deepak, I'm really curious because you hear probably a lot of concerns from your customers, maybe the top one or two.
Yeah, I think the biggest one I've heard, and I think this is probably goes to Ken's point, this is such uncharted territory, has to do with an industry that's so fixated on IP and IP protection and data protection. I think the risk about IP attribution. So when you use a model to generate IP of some sort, is there a risk that 10 years from now somebody comes claiming that that drug was based on my research and I need, not only attribution but also payment?
Yeah.
And that, I don't know if the industry has come through thinking how do we solve for that yet, because this goes back to what was the model trained on, what data did it have access to, and is that public domain data? Now, if you create an output from that model, is that your IP, or is it now shared with some researcher who published a paper? So I think those risks the lawyers are just catching up to that risk, and I think for us to have, for the market to have confidence that the IP being created is protected from those lawsuits in the future. I think there is that risk which needs to get addressed for a larger proliferation of this to happen within the research organization. I think you can get away with jury duty questions and GPTs, but when you get into that realm, then this starts to get a little more serious.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting legal battles over IP in the next decade, so that'll be fun to watch. Great point. Tim, I'm going to lead you down into one thing I know we've talked about, which is a challenge around talent in this space. Maybe you could talk about that, because I think it's an important point.
Sure. I'll talk a little bit about that one and also another one. I think the challenge from a talent perspective is one about our existing employees and upskilling those employees in the modern technologies, particularly AI. That's not just our tech talent, but it's also upskilling our business talent to be able to actually do work in AI. We're talking about how do we train our business partners, our employees, on how to write effective prompts. Prompts are the language of AI. And if our employees don't know how to write effective prompts, then more than likely they won't have a good experience. So, I think talent, hiring good talent, training good talent, upskilling good talent is a key area. Another one that's somewhat related is I'm concerned about change management. And how do we inspire our employees to use AI and to maximize our investment in AI?
So adopting what you're doing.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And I find it interesting. Everyone has an opinion about AI, but the majority of people have never used AI or public AI tools, or they've not used them to help them be more effective in their work. So I think all of us have a challenge around change management in terms of how do we get people to use it, one, and then two, to most effectively use it.
That's a really interesting point, because I think, if we would survey folks, they would say that they've used AI. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like saying, hey, I don't like Brussels sprouts until I try them, right? But I wonder how many actually have. Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Morali, let's round it out.
Well, in terms of concerns, I share what Deepak said, right? IP is, if you noticed yesterday, Adam talked about indemnification only when he talked about Titan, right? Anthropic CEO was on stage, he left the stage. They didn't talk about indemnification, but Titan models, they're offering indemnification. So that's something that we are working with AWS. So that's a top concern. From a skills perspective, I think Tim said it really well. Same thing with us, upskilling existing talent, prompt engineers, LLM ops, which requires prompt engineers to work with the different personas. So that's something we are also concerned about and working on.
Awesome. So I want to try to leave about 15 minutes for questions. So this will be the last one before we go to questions. How do you approach your buying decisions, right? Do you build it? Do you buy it from a vendor? Do you partner? Do you use a combination of that? Ken, I'd like to hear from you on how you're approaching the implementations.
So right now, I would say we haven't built our own. We generally used open available models, whether it's the ChatGPT or whether it's something from Google, or we're not at that level where we're still playing with the models and trying to understand it, so we haven't. And I will caveat that with, and this is the danger, when we talk about AI, it's not just about LLMs, right? So if I talk to my scientific community, they've been doing models for years. We have a huge SageMaker implementation. Well, that uses models. So what I would say is, from an LLM perspective, we have either bought, used open, free, because there's some really cool free ones out there that you can consume. Hugging Face is a great source. Or we've used the publicly available models specifically for LLM at this time. I'm not sure if we're ready to start writing our own. There's enough really great work out there that can be refined and tuned before we find a use case. In the research community, I would say that they probably have more of a special nature to start doing their own creation.
Tim?
We're doing all of the above. I think from a partnering perspective, we're partnering for capability and also for capacity. We're working with large organizations. We're also working with startups. And we're taking a bit of a different approach with startups, not just kind of a client-vendor relationship, but with investments in equity to kind of benefit from the intellectual property that we're providing.
Some sort of co-development model?
Is helping them be effective, but also helping us achieve benefit as well. I heard a speaker at a different conference that kind of changed my thinking about buy versus build. I think the paradigm is build more or build less. Because if you're going to develop a solution that's really meaningful to solve a problem, and I think particularly in our industry, you're going to have to build some. And so that's kind of the question that we ask ourselves, given a particular use case. Do we need to build less or build more? And that helps to guide how we approach it.
Yeah, that's a good point, because there's not a lot of buying options sometimes. Really?
We also do all three, buy, build, and partner, so I'll explain that. So there are three major patterns, right, with generative AI. The first pattern is consume. ChatGPT is an example where the foundation models, the fine-tuning, and the data retrieval, as well as the application, the entire stack is provided by a provider, service provider. The second pattern is extend. So like Anthropic's Claude model, the foundation model and the fine-tuning is provided by Anthropic. But then we do RAG approach to ingest our own data and then build our own application. That's the extend pattern. And then there's a build pattern where everything, the entire stack is built custom, right? But Gilead is more anchored on the second pattern, extend pattern. So we use Anthropic Claude model more extensively than any other OpenAI or other models. But we use partners to add capacity to build it on top of it. So we do all three.
Yeah, it's pretty sophisticated. So you actually have established these patterns and you apply them to certain situations.
Yes.
I like that. Deepak, I know you're happy with any of those as long as it's not AWS, but maybe you can give us some.
Run those EC2s.
Yeah.
No, I think building a model from scratch, if you want to call it that, it's a very expensive affair. We know that. And so I would be very surprised if in the medium to long term, any of our customers actually do that, unless they have hundreds of millions of dollars to spare, which is probably not that easy. It's just not that, the upkeep of the model, right? So you're not going to just build it. You need access to the data to train the model. It's just not easy to come by, especially in something like imaging. And then the amount of compute capacity, the point we made earlier. And then you just got to keep improving the model because it's not done. And do we have the talent in-house? Can we buy that talent? So it's just not a money thing. Is that the right thing to do? So I think that in the short, medium, maybe in the short term, there's a lot of academic interest, a lot of science projects that get spun up because somebody wants to show that they're good at building models. But then in the medium to long term, it's probably going to be the model providers who do this for a living, and tweaking those models is probably where most customers end up.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a tough endeavor to do that yourself at this point.